The early morning in Dallas was so quiet that only a gentle wind could be heard, rustling through the trees and carrying the faint hum of a private jet waiting on the runway, its metal surface glinting in the sunrise. Olivia arrived with little fuss. No noisy entourage, no suitcases, just her phone in one hand and a calm look on her face. To anyone watching, it would seem as though she walked these runways every day, as at home here as she would be around her own kitchen table. Inside the jet, the crew was already moving about with quiet efficiency. They checked the last details: safety lists, catering, and passenger comfort. Sarah, the chief flight attendant, kept a careful eye on everything, making sure nothing was left to chance. Yet, when Olivia appeared at the foot of the stairs, Sarah's focus sharpened a bit more. She didn't have obvious reasons, but there was something about this new passenger that felt off, out of the ordinary. Maybe it was because her name had shown up last minute on the manifest, or maybe it was just a hunch, a feeling from years of experience that, for some reason she couldn't name, today might not be just another routine flight across the country. Sarah stepped forward from the galley, her back straight and her hands folded neatly in front of her, as if she was about to handle an inspection. With a gentle but unmistakably firm tone, she greeted Olivia and, without wasting any time, asked for her name and confirmation. Her words were polite, almost sweet, but anyone could hear the authority underneath. It was as if, for a second, the usual calm of the cabin was put on hold, and every other member of the crew watched out of the corner of their eye. Olivia, not missing a beat, answered just as calmly. She explained she was the passenger on the manifest, the one who had booked the entire flight. Her voice was relaxed, almost making light of the situation, but not defensive. Sarah listened, her eyes narrowing slightly. She glanced quickly at her tablet, verifying the details, but her face still showed doubt. It was not every day that a client arrived alone, carrying barely anything, and looking entirely at ease in a space that most travelers found intimidating. While Sarah's lips formed a practiced smile, a silent question hung in the air, obvious to both women. Was there more to Olivia's arrival than just paperwork? Before anyone else could say more, another crew member, Joe, approached from the back of the cabin. He carried a printed manifest and double-checked the details. Quietly, he confirmed that Olivia was not only on the list, but was right at the top, her name highlighted as the sole client. His tone was measured, aiming to clear up the confusion without stirring the mood further. Sarah, however, felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment, even as she maintained her professional stance. She did not back down entirely. There was still an edge in her questions, the kind that revealed she was not going to let her guard down just yet. The mood inside the jet shifted, not in an obvious way, but enough that everyone noticed. It felt as though the air had thickened, the sense of a standoff lingering between the two women. Even Joe, usually quick with a reassuring word, hovered silently to one side. Olivia, for her part, merely rolled her shoulders as if carrying an old, tired weight. She did not snap, did not even raise her voice. She simply moved past Sarah, not to prove a point, but because it was clear she had been through small battles like this many times before. And as she settled into her seat, you could sense that kind of exhaustion, the one reserved for people who are asked over and over to justify belonging. Even with Joe's clear confirmation, Sarah could not shake the uneasy feeling that clung to her. She leaned in closer to Joe when she thought no one was listening, her voice lowered to a whisper. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "It just doesn't add up." Joe shrugged and tapped the manifest again, the details right there in black and white. But Sarah's doubt lingered. It was as if she could not trust the same protocol she had relied on for so many years. Instead, she watched Olivia with cautious eyes, determined to keep everything under control, at least from her end. Olivia, meanwhile, settled into her seat with a natural, almost practiced grace. She slipped her phone into her bag and gazed out the window as though she had taken this flight 100 times before. The rest of the cabin took note of the tension, even while trying to look involved in their own activities. An older couple, sitting across the aisle, avoided making eye contact with anyone. Their bodies turned slightly away, but their ears seemed tuned in to every word. The hushed unease floated through the cabin, connecting the strangers in silent curiosity and awkwardness. Every now and then someone glanced at Olivia, then quickly looked away, acting as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Sarah could not let it go. After a few minutes spent pretending to check inventory behind the curtain, she returned to Olivia's seat. Her expression was different this time. There was not much of a smile left, and her voice was sharp enough to make everyone else quiet down, even more than before. "I'll need to see your ID and your company connection," she announced, flat and efficient, acting as if it was all just part of the rules. But her manner said she was fishing for a mistake, searching for a slip that would justify her suspicions. Olivia met her gaze without blinking. She reached into her bag with slow movements, pulled out her wallet, and handed over a government-issued ID along with the membership card from the company, AmeriCorp Partners, a name that was well known across the industry for exclusive charter flights. She held Sarah's stare and spoke in a way everyone could hear. "Funny, you never asked me for this before. In fact, I have flown with AmeriCorp Partners at least a dozen times this year, including once last week. What's different this time?" Her tone was careful but firm, bringing out the subtle discomfort floating in the cabin. Passengers exchanged uneasy looks, aware that the conversation was on the edge. The tension in the air made every word heavier, but both women kept their composure, neither one shouting but neither backing down. Joe, sensing the conversation had gone too far, stepped in between Sarah and Olivia, raising his voice just enough for everyone to hear. He reminded Sarah and the others that all the paperwork was in order and that Olivia had every right to be on board. He even pointed out that AmeriCorp Partners had confirmed the booking themselves, double-checking each step. But Sarah was not backing down so easily. She insisted her concerns were about the safety and satisfaction of the other clients, trying to make it sound like she was just following protocol. Her tone, though, told a different story. It was less about rules and more about Olivia herself. You could feel the shift in the conversation. Every sentence became a little sharper, and people started picking up on what was going unsaid. No one mentioned it directly, but Sarah's eyes lingered on Olivia's jeans and her relaxed attitude, clearly using personal judgment rather than facts. The more she pushed, the clearer it became that her issue was never the credentials. It was the way Olivia fit in, or in her mind, did not fit in. Everything came to a head when Sarah finally said, "You do not really look like you belong here." That was all it took. Everyone heard the words for what they were. An invisible wall went up inside the plane, the atmosphere thick with discomfort as the truth of Sarah's prejudice came out for everyone to see. The tension that had filled the cabin all this time finally broke when Sarah lost her cool and grabbed Olivia's arm, her grip tight and unyielding as she tried to pull her from the seat. Olivia immediately pulled back, her voice clear and steady as she said, "Don't touch me." There was something in her tone that left no room for argument, but Sarah had already gone too far, caught up in her growing anger and frustration. In the blink of an eye, she raised her hand and slapped Olivia across the face. The sharp sound echoed through the small space, and every person on the plane went still. For a moment, even the hum of the engines seemed to fade away. The older couple dropped their books and stared in shock, while Joe stood frozen, halfway between stepping forward to stop it and simply trying to make sense of what had just happened. Olivia sat perfectly still, her cheek reddening, but her eyes never leaving Sarah's. The pain was real, but it was the embarrassment the humiliation, and the sheer disbelief that settled in the air like a heavy weight. No one said a word right. Away, no one even moved. It was as if time had stopped, everyone processing that the argument had passed a line that could never be uncrossed. All eyes darted around, waiting for someone to take charge, but it was Joe who finally spoke up. You could hear the outrage in his voice. He sounded nothing like the calm, level-headed guy everyone knew. "Sarah, that is enough. Do you even know who you just hit?" His words caught in his throat for a second, but then he pressed on, not bothering to lower his voice. "Olivia is not just any passenger. She is the main shareholder and CEO of AmeriCorp Partners. This is her plane." The impact of his words was immediate. The hush that had followed the slap now turned into a low ripple of shock, spreading from row to row. Sarah stood there, her mouth open, eyes wide with disbelief, all the certainty and authority she had carried a moment ago draining away in an instant. She glanced from Joe to Olivia and then to the passengers, realizing everyone was staring at her, not just as a member of the crew, but as the one who had crossed a line. No one needed to say it out loud. The balance of power had shifted so completely that you could almost feel the change in the air. Everything Sarah knew about her position and control slipped away without warning. Even so, nothing could undo what had just happened. The damage to reputations, to trust, to any sense of normalcy on that flight was already set in stone. Olivia took a slow breath and, without another word, returned to her seat. She moved with a kind of quiet strength that made it clear she was not looking for payback or some emotional outburst. She did not scowl or glare at Sarah. She just sat down, straightened her jacket, and folded her hands in her lap. It was the sort of poise that comes from facing this kind of thing before. Years of learning to let the world watch, judge, and sometimes lash out without letting it change who you are. Olivia's calm almost seemed to settle things, but instead, it left everyone else feeling their own discomfort even more. Nobody in the plane tried to speak up. The crew kept their heads down, pretended to check safety notes, or busied themselves with tasks that did not need doing, too embarrassed to say anything. The older couple, who had watched everything unfold, looked away, as if hoping that ignoring the situation would somehow erase it. For a while, the only sounds came from the engines and the faint squeak of seats as people fidgeted. Guilt and embarrassment drifted through the cabin, keeping everyone on edge, unsure if anyone should say sorry or try to explain away what they had just witnessed. No one did. As the hours went by, the quiet in the cabin only seemed to grow heavier. It was strange how a place that was always filled with the sounds of people talking or the low hum of small talk could suddenly feel so still. Sarah, sitting near the galley, could not shake the memory of her outburst. The moment her hand met Olivia's cheek replayed in her head over and over, each time making her feel even smaller and more ashamed. She fidgeted with safety pamphlets and wiped already clean counters, but nothing distracted her from that terrible feeling in her stomach. Joe, usually so warm and ready to joke with anyone, buried himself in mindless tasks, organizing the drinks cart, counting napkins, even tightening a screw on one of the door handles. He kept his eyes down, making sure not to meet Olivia's gaze or the eyes of the other passengers. In the last row, the older couple kept their voices low and their conversation brief, each glance between them saying more than any words could. Olivia, meanwhile, sat upright with her notebook open, scribbling thoughts in careful handwriting. Anyone watching her might have guessed she was writing a letter or mapping out a plan. She looked composed, barely letting any emotion flicker across her face, refusing to let what happened get close enough to shake her calm. Eventually, unable to take the tension any longer, Sarah gathered her courage and walked down the narrow aisle toward Olivia. She gripped a can of sparkling water, holding it out as a kind of peace offering, Her voice was thin as she said, "Would you like something to drink?" Olivia did not even look up at first. When she finally did, her answer was calm but sharp, the kind of reply that left no room for misunderstanding. "No, thank you," she said, her tone making it clear the refusal went deeper than just a drink. Sarah hesitated, not sure whether to walk away or try harder, but Olivia's steady gaze stopped her from saying more. The small exchange spoke volumes to everyone close enough to hear. This rift was about more than what had happened physically. It had cut right into the heart of trust, not just between two people, but within the whole structure of the workplace. Sarah, flustered, started apologizing, her words rushed and lacking true conviction. Olivia, still collected, cut her off gently but firmly. There's a difference between being truly sorry and just being afraid of the fallout. Maybe think about what really drove you today. It grew even more silent after that. The weight of Olivia's words lingered, prompting inward reflection and a new layer of shame thicker than before. Joe finally broke the thick silence one more time, pulling Sarah aside as she tried to collect herself. He spoke in a low voice, but there was a seriousness there that could not be ignored. "You know everything that happened in here is on camera, right? These private jets all have recording systems in the cabin. It is policy, so there is not going to be any way to spin this. Whatever you are thinking, there is no covering it. Up." The realization seemed to hit Sarah all at once. Her face went pale, and she glanced around the cabin as if searching for a way to undo the last hour. The simple fact that the whole incident was recorded added a new level of dread to what she was already feeling. The consequences now felt even more unavoidable and final, with the events about to be viewed by others far beyond that plane. Meanwhile, Olivia rested her fingers on her cheek, not with anger, but almost as a reminder to herself of what had just happened. She understood that the slap itself would fade, but what really mattered was how the company would move forward. The direction of AmeriCorp Partners was about to get a serious shakeup, one that could outlast every scar. Captain Thomas, who had followed everything from the cockpit through security updates, soon called Olivia to speak with him in the small, private lounge near the front of the jet. As soon as Olivia stepped inside, Thomas closed the door and went straight to the point, not wasting time on small talk. He looked at her with concern, but spoke with the kind of straightforwardness everyone respected him for. "Olivia, I know what happened back there crossed every possible line. For what it is worth, you have my full support and the backing of AmeriCorp Partners behind you for whatever needs to be done. This cannot be left unresolved." Olivia nodded and pulled out a file she had already prepared. She had been thinking about these issues for a while. Passing the folder across the table, she explained, "Here are proposals for real changes. We need clear policies on equity, better training for every team member, firm consequences for misconduct, and full transparency at every level. It is time we act, not just talk." Thomas flipped through the pages, understanding this was not something that could wait for a future meeting or another discussion. He agreed quickly, saying, "You are right. This is about respect and responsibility. I promise these changes will start rolling out as soon as we land." The mood in the room was businesslike, but there was a shared sense of urgency. When Olivia stepped out of the lounge, headed back to her seat, Sarah could hardly meet her eyes. The sound of Olivia's footsteps was the only thing that broke the uneasy quiet as she walked past. Sarah felt every second stretch out, as if time had suddenly slowed, each moment pressing on her with the question of what would happen next. She realized that it was not just about what she had done. It was also about what everyone would choose to do going forward. Her shame mixed with uncertainty, making it impossible to relax. As Olivia moved past, she paused for a moment, not even turning to face Sarah directly. Her voice was low, but carried all the weight it needed. "The problem isn't who I am, it's who people assume I'm supposed to be," Olivia said, then walked on, leaving the words to hang in the air. The sentence struck Sarah more deeply than any long lecture or harsh punishment ever could have. That single line echoed around the cabin, sticking with everyone who heard it. Now, the silence was not just about regret or embarrassment, it had shifted into a different kind of waiting. Sarah sat wondering what her future would look like after landing, knowing this moment would shape it for a long time. The rest of the flight passed in this thoughtful, almost heavy atmosphere. Sarah stared out the window, her mind roaming in circles as she tried to make sense of how she had ended up here. The fear of being let go from her job gnawed at her with every passing mile, but even stronger was the embarrassment that kept coming back whenever she remembered her outburst. She realized that part of her actions were rooted in old habits and judgments she had never questioned. Now, all she could do was sit with that ugly truth, hoping she would have a chance to do better. Meanwhile, Olivia picked up where she had left off, organizing some paperwork for their upcoming meeting in Chicago. There was a confidence in the way she moved. No fuss, no drama, just quiet determination. She was not going to let this one moment define her or cast a shadow over everything she had accomplished. Olivia believed in making her mark through action, not just words. For her, it was all about turning the uncomfortable silence of the situation into positive change, both in the company and in herself. That was the kind of power she could trust, the ability to move on and build something better from the ashes. As the plane began its gradual descent toward O'Hare, Sarah finally found the nerve to get up and walk over to Olivia's seat. She took a shaky breath, standing in the narrow aisle, and spoke quietly so only Olivia could hear. "I need to apologize," Sarah said, her voice steady now. "There's no excuse for what I did. I judged you before even trying to know you, and that's on me. I have no one else to blame." She paused, searching for words that didn't sound like she was just saying what needed to be said. "I made a mistake, and I know it hurt not just you, but what we're all trying to build here. I learned a hard lesson today, one I won't forget." Olivia turned in her seat, facing Sarah, fully. She listened to every word, taking in the tone as much as the message. There was no anger in her face, only seriousness. "Thank you for telling me that," Olivia replied carefully. She made no quick promises, no simple offers of forgiveness. Instead, she let the moment sit heavy but honest. It was a space where both women faced their own flaws, aware that true change meant more than just words. It would be tested in all the days to come. When the apology was over, Joe came over, to Olivia looking worried. He'd been watching the whole exchange from his seat near the back, sensing that more decisions needed to be made. He lowered his voice and asked, "So, what's going to happen with Sarah? Is she completely out, or is there a path back for her?" Olivia took a moment to gather her thoughts before answering. "The response has to fit what happened. Nothing more, nothing less," she said quietly. "Sarah is going to be put on immediate leave. But if she is willing to go through new training, really learn from this, and take public responsibility for what happened, I believe there can be a way forward for her. This is not about kicking someone out just for making a mistake. It is about making sure people understand the weight of their actions and making a space where people can change." Joe nodded, clearly relieved to hear that this was not just about punishment. It was about responsibility and growth, about challenging the instinct to just cover things up or move on too quickly. AmeriCorps Partners needed to become a place where people learned from errors and where those lessons actually led to changes, not just empty meetings and quiet whispers. When the plane finally touched down in Chicago, there was a heavy quiet among the passengers and crew. Hardly anyone spoke as they gathered their things and waited for the doors to open. Olivia kept a calm face, moving down the aisle with steady steps. She paused for a second before heading out, giving one last glance back at the team. Her attention focused for a moment on Sarah, who still sat in her seat, barely moving, eyes fixed on the back of the chair in front of her. The weight of the day was written across her shoulders. Outside, a black SUV waited for Olivia near the curb. As she stepped off the jet bridge and moved toward it, she stopped and turned to address the group, still within earshot. Her voice was clear but gentle. "Do not forget, when you have a place of privilege, use it to look past your own assumptions," she said. "This work we do, it does not end here. We are all responsible together." Olivia did not linger for thanks or applause. She simply got into the SUV, certain that the message she left behind was bigger than just her. It was a reminder for everyone to do better. At the AmeriCorps Partners headquarters in downtown Chicago, Olivia wasted no time after arriving. She called the top executives into the main conference room and got right to the point. Everyone could sense this was not going to be business as usual. Olivia calmly outlined the first steps. Effective immediately, Sarah would be placed on administrative leave. There would also be a required realignment program for everyone in management, no exceptions. It was not just about formal training, but about having hard conversations, confronting personal biases, and making sure the company faced its own blind spots head-on. Some of the team looked uneasy, expecting a press release or plans to manage the fallout quietly behind the scenes. Olivia made it clear that would not happen. There will be no cover-up or spinning the story to save face. We own what happened, and that is how we move forward, she insisted. She wanted each person in that room to understand that they were at a turning point. The way they chose to react was the beginning of real change. The day's events would not just get swept away. Instead, they would spark ongoing discussion and honest growth. For Olivia, this was the company's chance to build something fairer and stronger together. 2 weeks passed and Sarah found herself in a small, windowless conference room at AmeriCorps Partners Training Center. The chairs were arranged in a circle, and the only thing on the agenda was listening. She joined other employees as they heard stories from people whose lives had been changed by acts of exclusion and bias. They shared moments from their childhoods, office jokes that had cut deep, and times when their talents went unnoticed because someone never looked past first impressions. At times, Sarah felt raw and exposed, but she knew this was what it would take to really change, both for herself and for the culture at work. Slowly, she started asking questions instead of making assumptions. Day by day, the process helped her to look at herself and everyone else in a new light. She realized that rebuilding her career would be about more than skill or ambition. It meant seeing her place in the world differently. During the same period, somewhere above the Midwest, a different scene unfolded. On another AmeriCorps Partners flight, a new passenger was greeted by the crew without hesitation, just a simple, easy, "Welcome." That small shift showed just how much breaking the silence could ripple outward, planting the signs of change in everyday actions.